Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to Hobart and William Smith and to one of our institution's most revered honors, the Elizabeth Blackwell Award. We welcome our students, members of our faculty and staff, and our Geneva neighbors and regional neighbors that are here. We're especially fortunate to have members of our Board of Trustees joining us here, including the Chair of the Board of Trustees, Maureen Collins-Zupan, Bishop Prince Singh, member of the Board of Trustees, as well as Dr. Roy Dexheimer, a longtime member of the board and active member of the Honors Committee on the Board of Trustees. So welcome to everyone here. The Elizabeth Blackwell Award is given with care and with thought by our Board of Trustees and careful reflection. It's voted upon by our board at its annual meeting. Only 38 women in the past 50 years have been honored in this way. And today, we include the Most Reverend Catherine Jefferts Schori in the pantheon of women who have made a remarkable commitment to humanity. Like Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, they blazed new trails, and in so doing, offer a model to our students and really to all of us about a life of consequence. Past recipients have served humanity and have been awarded this distinction for their service in public service, in the public sphere, like former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, Senator Margaret Chase Smith, Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, or the first woman to be a member of the President's Cabinet, Frances Perkins. Others have distinguished themselves in advancing causes and movements, like Nobel Prize winner Wangari Maathai, Cherokee leader Wilma Mankiller, or the Special Olympics founder, Eunice Kennedy Shriver. In the arts, with singer Marian Anderson, to education, Chicago President Hannah Holborn Gray, to professional sports, with Billie Jean King. This award has been recognizing significant professional achievement and service to humanity. And as you can imagine, most of the women honored were the very first to hold the position. Today's recipient follows in this line of distinction and brings honor to this award and to Hobart and William Smith by her presence today. Our chaplain, the Reverend Leslie Adams, nominated Bishop Jefferts Schori for consideration. It was endorsed by our Honors Committee and a full vote of the Board of Trustees, and we are honored to welcome her today. In her nomination letter, Reverend Adams wrote, "Like Dr. Blackwell, Dr. Schori is a woman whose life opened new doors to other women by conspicuous professional achievement in a previously male-dominated occupation. She is the first woman presiding bishop in the Episcopal Church and the first woman primate in the worldwide Anglican Communion. As such," Leslie wrote, "she is a role model for women seeking to live out their vocations as ordained ministers in the church, as well as inspiration for women in lay leadership." Also, like Dr. Blackwell, Dr. Jefferts Schori has lived a life of service in which her talents and skills were offered to aid and benefit others. In her work as presiding bishop, but also in her previous positions, the bishop has been an advocate for the poor, both in this country and abroad. She has championed the full inclusion of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons in the church and in the secular world. In her first career as an oceanographer, and also in her ordained roles in the Episcopal Church, she has worked on environmental issues, including global warming. So for all these reasons, our Board of Trustees and Hobart and William Smith Colleges are proud to recognize her achievements and to hold out her life's journey as an oceanographer, a professor, a pilot, a pastor, and a bishop. A combination you don't usually hear in one sentence. Get your head around this, folks. An oceanographer, a professor, a pilot, a pastor, and a bishop. A life's journey, a life of consequence. I now call upon the Chair of the Board of Trustees, Maureen Collins-Zupan, to present on behalf of our Board of Trustees the Elizabeth Blackwell Award. Maureen.
Bishop, scientist, and advocate, Hobart and William Smith Colleges are proud to honor Catherine Jeffords Shorey as the 29th recipient of the Elizabeth Blackwell Award. Breaking a 500-year gender barrier, Jeffords Shorey was invested as presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in November 2006 at Washington National Cathedral. As the first woman to hold the role of presiding bishop, she is chief pastor and primate to the Episcopal Church's 2.4 million members in 16 countries and 110 dioceses, and joins with other principal bishops of the 38-member provinces of the Worldwide Anglican Communion. As presiding bishop, she has been a tireless voice in the international effort to eradicate extreme poverty, reduce hunger, and reverse the spread of HIV/AIDS. Through her leadership, the Episcopal Church has strengthened its dedication to issues of sustainability, universal education, and a global partnership for development. With integrity and honor, she has worked to move the Episcopal Church to a more inclusive status, championing the full presence of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons in the Church, and in doing so, aiding individuals throughout the world. Preceding her studies for the priesthood, she served as an oceanographer with the United States National Marine Fisheries Service. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Stanford University, a Master's of Science and PhD in Oceanography from Oregon State University, and a Master's of Divinity from Church Divinity School of the Pacific. A person of deep faith, Jeffords Shorey explains that religion and science are alike in that they are both fundamentally about what's out there. She says science asks about what's out there and how does it work. Religion and faith traditions ask questions of meaning. Why are we here, and how do we live a good life? They're complementary in the best sense. It is this worldview, one that is inclusive and expansive, that honors the dignity of all living things, and that seeks to improve the human condition through faith and science, which defines her ministry. In her version of reality, the Right Reverend Desmond Tutu writes of Jeffords Shorey, "Everything is sacred except sin." Now President Guerin will join me.
Great. Bishop, join us here. It's my favorite part. Now, by the powers vested in me by the Board of Trustees of Hobart and William Smith Colleges, it is my distinct privilege and with great pleasure that I confer upon Catherine Jeffords Shorey the 39th Elizabeth Blackwell Award for outstanding service to humanity. Congratulations.
Thank you. It is a deep privilege and honor to be given this award by Hobart and William Smith Colleges. I'm humbled by it. And I am reminded that I stand here only because of the difficult work done by so many women and men before me. Elizabeth Blackwell went through something like 29 medical schools before she found one that would admit her, albeit somewhat grudgingly. And I must give thanks for the male deans and professors who kept their word about admitting her, even if they originally gave it in jest. An awful lot of women and many people outside official circles of leadership have tried and failed to gain entry to many different vocations and opportunities. And we remember the ones who prevailed in the face of prejudice and doubt. But none of those named trailblazers made their entry wholly on their own. At the same time, the remembered ones have continued to inspire others to try. my own journey has been inspired by people like Amelia Earhart for her intrepid courage and her mysterious disappearance, but also by male pilots like Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and another woman, Burl Markham. I've been inspired by the witness of Jeanette Picard, who was a pioneer balloonist and the first woman ordained an Episcopal priest, but also by other members of her family, Auguste and Jacques, who went exploring in the other direction into the depths of the sea. I've been inspired by women like Marie Curie, pioneer in radioactivity, first woman and the first double Nobel laureate, but also by her younger colleagues, Albert Einstein, Heisenberg, Niels Bohr. In recent years, I would note the often nameless women who have insisted on peace in their own homelands. The market women of Liberia, who demanded that the warlords make peace. And when they gathered, they sat down around the perimeter of the building and said, "We're not leaving until you make it happen." The women of the Niger Delta, who shamed the oil companies into doing something about the violence and environmental degradation being visited on their people. I continue to marvel at the women and men of Rwanda and Congo who keep working to heal the trauma that has so damaged their societies. And I celebrate the remarkable leaders and pioneers in this part of New York. The outsized witness of Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Harriet Tubman, Susan B. Anthony, and their sisters. You know, their movement started with a tea party in Waterloo, and a rather different outcome than we're wrestling with from tea parties right now. That gathering in Seneca Falls was joined by quite a few men, and Frederick Douglass added his voice for greater access and fuller participation by all human beings. That movement has been about the liberation of the many, rather than special rights and greater power for those who are already inside and in charge. There was a powerful tide at work in those teacups around here in the 1840s. That tide keeps washing away barriers of gender and race and ethnicity and social class. As our brother Martin put it, the arc of the moral universe is long, and it bends toward justice. That arc bends toward the shores of a land where all people dwell in peace, because there is ultimate justice for all humanity and all creation. We live in hope for that world, and Hobart and William Smith colleges are part of a movement of encouraging leaders, the leaders of today's tea parties and coffee clutches and symposia that will help to bring that world to reality. And I am immensely grateful for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop. That was a lovely, lovely address. I thank you for that. And Tilly's here. That's good. We thank our Board of Trustees members that are here. I also see our former colleague on the board, Bishop Jack McKelvey, who joined us. I thank you, Bishop, for coming today and for your service as a member of our Board of Trustees. We thought it would be interesting to have a faculty group and colleagues to have a bit of a discussion with the bishop for the balance of our program because of her rich and varied history. So as we invite our trustees to take their seats and my faculty and dean colleagues to join us up here, let me introduce and bring forth our colleagues. Reverend Leslie Adams has been mentioned previously as the chaplain of the colleges, and y'all can come up. Since 1994, she's a graduate of Smith College and the Harvard Divinity School, the Dean of William Smith. Dr. Suzanne McNally, she's been a member of the History Department here since 1972. She serves as the Dean of William Smith College. She's a graduate of Douglas College with her PhD at SUNY Binghamton. Professor Michael Bukowski, longtime member of the faculty since 1976. He did his undergraduate, master's, and doctoral work at New York University. And Professor Nan Crystal Arons is a member of the Geoscience Department since 2001. Her undergraduate work at Penn State University and her master's and PhD at Harvard University. So from their perspectives, as you can see, as our chaplain, William Smith Dean, and Religious Studies and Geoscience faculty members, we thought this was the best way to have a conversation with Bishop Jeffords Schori and to kind of discuss some of the issues, and then, as time allows, to kick out some questions to the audience. So we'll remove this podium and get going with a good conversation. So, we're ready here. This is kind of like a talk show here. Kind of feeling like Maury Povich or something. Hopefully something a little more elevated. Help me out, Suzanne. Get me out of this. Why don't we start with you to have a reflection?
I appreciate the honor of being your first questioner. As is often the case here, our audience is sort of bimodal in age and experience. Lots of young people and lots of us not so young. These two groups I have found are interested in life stories from different perspectives. And I have found that hearing work biographies is particularly liberating for young people. It encourages them as they go out into the world. So I would be most grateful if you could speak about how your work life has unfolded. Paths, crossroads, obstacles, help.
All right. I started, as you heard, as an oceanographer. When I started graduate school in 1974, it was the first year that women were permitted to go to sea on the research vessels overnight. And then there had to be at least 2 of them. The first time I was chief scientist on a research cruise, the captain wouldn't talk to me because I was a woman and I didn't belong in his ship. I have to say that my work in the church has been much easier in that sense than it was as a scientist. There had been women in positions of leadership for quite some time, but there had been relatively few women in oceanography when I started. I only had 1 female professor in graduate school in statistics. So things have shifted a long way. And I guess I would also point to the reality that most of my peers have been educated in systems that expect collaboration rather than independent achievement. That collaboration on research projects, on developing proposals is the norm today. And it wasn't 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And I count that a significant and important and helpful shift in how we work together.
That's interesting. Leslie, did you want to follow up with a question?
Well, my question is a little bit on a different track, but I'm interested in how you handle, on the one hand, your role as somebody who proclaims the good news that in order to get life, we have to give up our life. In order to live, we have to die. and yet you're also sort of charged in preserving, leading an institution. And institutions sort of have a habit of not wanting to die. So I'm just interested in how you balance that theology and the practicality of your life.
Well, I think that work is, I would tie it to the prophetic tradition. And some wag said a long time ago that prophets are called to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Finding your life by losing it is a similar kind of response. In order to discover and receive what is most centrally important in human existence, you have to let go of wanting to be first or in charge of everything or hang on to what you think is the best of the past. You have to be willing to let go and risk something new, collaborate with people you've never collaborated with before, discover the blessing in the people who disagree with you, go into unexplored territory.
So it sounds like it gives you a lot of energy, actually, to do that.
Well, I think that's what life is about. It's about discovering the new that is always around us, the new possibility, the possibility that we can create together a world that is more life-giving than the one we currently enjoy.
Can I just follow up on that? You just said discovering the blessing with those that disagree with you. I gotta write that down. The blessing of those that disagree. Okay.
Yes.
So, given your role and the nature of your appointment in the first, there are people who may disagree with you. How do you approach that view as a blessing? How do you approach those organizational and personal issues that certainly have come before you?
When people who disagree can remain in relationship, there is something to be discovered in that tension. None of us holds the fullness of the truth. That's both what we proclaim as scientists and as theologians. None of us can ever know the full picture. Therefore, the person who holds another view of the same situation has to have something to teach us. And that's what I would count as the blessing, as well as remaining in relationship with the one who disagrees with us.
Could we send you to Washington, Bishop?
That's what politics originally meant.
Right.
It's the art of living in community and how to negotiate those disagreements.
Mm-hmm.
Not expunge or expel the people who hold a different opinion.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, did you want to follow?
Well, I'd like to explore one of those unexplored territories, perhaps. Traditionally, the ministry of the church has been to people, to the poor, to the sick, to the disenfranchised, and that is very much part of the good news. But I think as an environmentalist, we recognize that social sustainability and economic sustainability, the people piece, is not possible without environmental sustainability. So where is the church in leadership on those issues? Where can we go? And how do we as individual people of faith live that out as part of our own ministry?
Part of it is, I think, what you referred to earlier as dying to the sense that we are the most important things in the universe. That's in the technical theological language, that's called idolatry. Or that human beings are the most important thing in the universe. The Judeo-Christian tradition has at least tended in that direction, understanding that human beings bear the image of God and therefore, in some systems stand at the summit of the ladder of development. There are theologians today who have helped us to at least ask the question, that if God is the originator of all that is, then all of creation must bear the divine imprint in some way, reflect divine creativity, and therefore must be honored at the very least. The Genesis creation stories challenge human beings to be good gardeners, caretakers of that which supports us all. How do we do that? By being more respectful, by looking for the blessing in the other parts of creation, by understanding that it's not ours to exploit or use up or destroy, but to nurture for the benefit of all of creation. Because if one part of creation is diminished, we all are. We all are. And I hope somebody will tell me the story about the dog.
The dog's an Episcopalian.
Comes to chapel every week.
And an institution on campus, I might add.
That dog is owned by Professor Dunbar Moody. He's over there.
Chapel dog, so
She always comes to chapel.
She always comes to chapel, so it's deeply spiritual. Professor Dubkowski.
I was very moved by your remarks, particularly the respect in the way that you gave to the people who came before you, both the named and the unnamed. I'm very honored to be here, and really very honored to be a member of the faculty here that recognizes the contributions of the named and the unnamed, especially with this award. Obviously, religion is very much in the news, both for good and ill. Religion is associated with horrible violence in the world. And religion is also associated with responses, very positive, life-affirming responses to that violence. And we also have, as you know, I'm sure you know very well, recent public opinion polls, Pew surveys, et cetera, that seem to be challenging the future of organized religion, or at least how Americans in particular are finding a comfortable home within religious institutions. So I guess I would be interested to hear you speak about that from your perspective as presiding bishop of an important religious institution going forward, as well as your reflection on the 6 or 7 years that you've held this post already. Are you an optimist? Are you a pessimist? Are you worried? How are you responding to I think what everyone would agree is a very dynamic, changing, almost by the second situation that we're in?
I'm a hope-filled person. I think that's what it means to have faith. I think this is one of the most exciting times to be a person of faith, connected with a religious tradition, in probably the last half a millennium, because it is changing and the future's not entirely clear, but it's clear that important things are going to shift. The polls tell us that growing numbers of Americans count themselves as SBNR, spiritual but not religious. Religion is a social construct that binds together, that's really what the word means, people who share more or less a common understanding of the transcendent. Most people of faith, most people of spiritual awareness discover that they cannot continue to grow in relationship with the transcendent all by themselves. That they need a community. And as soon as a community begins to form, you have a nascent religion. Many different sorts have been tried out over human history, and they've coalesced into at least streams of tradition. the ones that we call the great world religions. Because I think they have tested those truths about relationship between human beings and among human beings, relationship between human beings and the transcendent, and relationship between human beings and the rest of creation. That's why I think religious traditions are important. But they must be set in forms and constructs that are always contextually limited because they're bound in time and space. If they're living organisms, we talk about the body of Christ, they have to continue to grow and adapt to a wide variety of contexts and realities. I have no doubt that the truths I know in Christianity will continue to be proclaimed and lived out. But I think the forms that the communities take are going to shift. They are shifting. We're shifting how we call formal leadership into service. We're shifting how communities gather to celebrate their relationship with the transcendent. They don't all meet on Sunday mornings anymore. They don't all meet in stone Gothic buildings anymore. They might gather in a pub to celebrate what they know of that tradition and to challenge their members for life in the wider community, and then watch a football game together. There's nothing intrinsically sacrilegious about that. Tiny example. But I think we're increasingly going to be far more present in the world as people of faith, which I think is where we're meant to be, rather than retreated into sanctuaries that are rarely left.
Anyone want to follow up directly to that, or do we want to? Let me just take it, if I could, to beyond just the church role, to a leadership question of what you see from your travels. You're traveling 80% of the time around the country, around the world. What do you see as a kind of a leadership markers evolving in this sort of velocity of change moment that we're living, transitioning to something? What does it say about other sectors in corporate America, the not-for-profit sector, government, faith, as a leadership marker? What are you seeing evolving, and what trends should we be looking for?
I think effective leadership, it really shares common characteristics. You have to have some courage. You have to be willing to risk trying new things. You have to be willing to let go the dead wood of the past in favor of the emerging creative sprouts that are coming up, and be willing to fail, because engagement with the new is not always going to be successful. And if you're not failing, you're not exploring enough. The willingness to collaborate and network across old boundaries, not just with people you think are like yourself or like your institution. MOOCs are an example. Massive open online courses. What's that going to do for higher education? It's those attitudes and possibilities are beginning to enter, at least my religious tradition. A priest has begun a grouping of collaborators who want to post courses online to teach people about the 10 Commandments or spiritual practices or, confirmation preparation. We can learn things from other sectors if we're willing to look and build those relationships. And I think we're going to see far less hierarchical systems. We're going to see much more networked systems, much more organic kinds of structures that move and adapt more readily.
I'm wondering about politics. The relationship between religion and politics these days is prominent, salient, and sometimes in troubling ways. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how we might be able to shape that relationship so that it's more constructive than it seems to be at the moment.
I've actually been encouraged by what I've seen, at least in this country, in this administration. There's a sense, I think, in the wider culture that politics has been captive to one strand of the tradition, of the Christian tradition, for, some years. The administration that's in Washington right now has invited into the conversation a very broad range of religious traditions. I've served on a White House Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships that's worked on human trafficking for the last 2 years. And it's included a Buddhist nun, a Mormon, Roman Catholic sister, me, Lutherans, Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christians, Jewish leaders, and there would have been many more if they'd gotten through the vetting process. But it takes so long to vet people for that work, like 18 months, that they never managed to fill out the bill. But the White House and those faith-based offices in all of the departments listen to a very broad range of religious traditions and leaders. I think that's a sign of enormous health. We share a broad range of goals for social well-being. We have an image of what a good society looks like that is shared in great abundance. I think that's a sign of constructive health and possibility. When a government of any sort is captive to one particular religious tradition or one slice of a particular religious tradition, we need to worry. That's where things go off the rails.
Can I sort of follow up a little bit? What is your sense, maybe you've already partially answered it, of the health of real interfaith conversation in the United States today? I actually have students, both first years and seniors, reading Gustav Niebuhr's Beyond Tolerance, and his notion that tolerance is we're not interested in tolerance, we're interested in going beyond tolerance, something deeper than tolerance, which involves true engagement with the other and true conversation. So what's your sense of the health of that conversation in America?
I think it's healthy in some local situations, and there's some really creative things going on. There's a program across the Jewish and Muslim traditions in this country that's pairing up synagogues and mosques so that they might eat together.
That's important.
Pray together and learn about each other's traditions and discover, I think, how much is shared in common. There's an example that I know a little better personally in Omaha, that hotbed of radicalism, where the Episcopal Diocese and a Jewish congregation and a Muslim congregation 5 or 6 years ago sat down and said, we want to learn more about one another. They have at this point bought a piece of land together. Each is going to build its own worship site, and they're going to build an interfaith study center. Every person in that community I have spoken with of all those traditions tells me about how much his or her own faith has been deepened in that process. Some people think that interfaith or interreligious dialogue is going to water down your faith. No. Engaging with the other, there's the blessing of that difference again, is an opportunity to discover more deeply what you do believe, to test it, and to discover what you share with others and where the differences are, and how those differences might even be constructive. I'm encouraged, but there needs to be a whole lot more of it.
Yeah, but you're encouraged by initiation of those examples on a local level. I think
Yes.
that's where it has to happen,
Yes.
right? It doesn't.
Yes, face to face, has to be
Face-to-face.
incarnate. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Great.
We want to get some other questions in, and then we'll go out to the audience here. But Nan or Leslie, anything you want to?
Well, one thing I was just thinking as you were speaking is that we've been talking primarily about folks who are inside traditions. And one thing that I find, and this is speaking to my own experience as an evolutionary biologist, it ain't cool to be a Christian. So the part of the other that we're reaching out to is folks who are spiritual but not religious, or who don't really value that side of our humanity. So where are the interfaces where we can reach out to draw those others into a conversation that will offer us that blessing? Where are those moments? Where are those places that we find it? And I'm thinking really individually here, because we're all individuals, we're navigating our way through the landscape and thinking about where can we find these moments, and then how do we start that conversation?
I think it comes most easily in occasions of awe and wonder. When we see or experience things that make us pause and be grateful or aware in a deeper way, whether it's the birth of a child or a majestic sunset or the complexity of a nudibranch or the internal structure of a cell. There is something that draws us outside of ourselves. The ability of people of faith to talk about that in a more open way is what invites that conversation. We tend to use technical language like evangelism for that, but it's about being able to share that experience of wonder, or that experience of something beyond ourselves that draws others into the conversation.
Or the experience of gratitude.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that happens everywhere. And it's simply a matter of pointing to it.
And identifying it in the moment. I think that is the challenge of finding that moment, realizing before it's gone by, and then being able to seize that.
I taught religious studies for a little while at Oregon State. And I remember in a class on the New Testament, a student came up after class who was always, challenging things because he was uncomfortable with a wider, more open perspective. And I said to him one day after class, "This class must be just enormously difficult for you. Why do you stay?" And he said, "Oh, my spiritual armor is just getting stronger all the time." I don't find that to be a religious attitude, because there's no wonder, there's no curiosity, there's no gratitude for that discovery.
Leslie, did you? Okay. So we invite questions from the audience here to Bishop Jeffrey Shorey, and Michael's going to take my mic.
Hi. I was wondering how you moved from the field of oceanography to religious studies, and how you even became a professor of religious studies from such a different background.
Okay. The flip answer is I'm still fishing. Still working in the depths. I came back to the church after college when I read the physicists of the early 20th century who talked about wonder and mystery. When I did that, I also began to find the permission I needed to look at my own faith tradition in a deeper way. I was curious, and I took, a class on religion and feminism and a class on religion and psychology. I take sort of one class a term in the midst of my graduate work. And I just kept being curious. I took, I don't know, quite a lot of that. Enough that I got most of it out of the way before I went to seminary. Marcus Borg was at Oregon State at that time. And I took several of his classes. And at some point he said, well, why don't you come and help teach this class? That's the short answer to what you're asking. The larger question about how I shifted from oceanography to ordained ministry has both a positive and a negative impetus to it. The positive aspect I've talked about, most of it. 3 people in my congregation asked me within a very short period of time whether I'd ever thought about being a priest, and I hadn't. When I was growing up, women weren't ordained. The first one was ordained after I graduated from college. It just wasn't on my radar screen. The negative impulse was that in the mid-1980s, the bottom fell out of the federal research budget. If I wanted to continue doing oceanography, it looked like I was going to spend all my time writing grant proposals. That's not what drew me into science. I didn't find much wonder in that possibility. Some people do, but that was not where I thought my gifts fit. The short story is it took me 5 years to say yes to the invitation.
Hi. Recently, Hamas and Gaza Strip has appointed a woman as a spokesperson. I wondered if you have anything to say on that. And second question to that is, how do you think the West, with its more anti-Hamas views, will take this woman as their spokesperson?
Oh boy, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting development. Women come in the same range of emotional characteristics as men do. Look at Margaret Thatcher, who represented a very hard line governing set of principles, versus maybe one of the Irish presidents, Mary Corrigan. Women politicians run the gamut. I don't know anything about this one. Golda Meir on the Israeli side had, her own hard line. It's an interesting statement by the PLO that they're going to recognize women in leadership, which I think is a good thing. The Islamic Society of North America had a woman president, Ingrid Mattson, for some time. She's no longer the president. Women have a leadership role in Islam, which is honored in some parts of the tradition, more honored in some parts of the tradition than in others. I think it's an interesting development, and we won't know how it gets worked out until we see some data. It may be a surprise move, an unexpected way to destabilize the current situation, which could be enormously helpful, or not.
Good afternoon. I'd be very interested to hear. I appreciated the inclusivity of your remarks. And while I've only been to 2 Blackwell Awards, I think I imagine oftentimes we have a lot to say to women within these contexts. But I'd be interested to hear what you have to say to men. Because I find myself, one of the classes I'd love to sit in on campus is Men and Masculinity. And hopefully I'll have time at some point. But I really think we're in the midst of redefining what does it mean to be, what does it mean to be masculine? And I find myself, I embody in some senses the ways we are redefining that. But in other senses, I'm still a white male in positions of power and am able to take advantage of those in various ways. So I'd be very interested to hear some direct comments to how do you think about what the role of men is and should be and things we can do?
I think men need to be whole human beings, as do women, which means honoring all parts of our inner being as well as our outer being. I still find Jungian psychology to be very helpful and provocative because it invites us to reflect on the fact that we all have, women have an inner masculine aspect and men have an inner feminine aspect. And we all sit somewhere on a very wide spectrum, which I think is part of what has helped the developed West, at least, begin to make some peace with the variety of gender expression and the variety of human sexuality. We are not binary beings or a binary gendered creation. No other species is. Why would we expect that human beings are? I think being fully who each one of us is created to be has to do with honoring the uniqueness of our creation and the ways in which we can be in relationship with others that honor their unique creation. I don't think I can, not being a man, I don't think I can tell men who they need to be except whole. Whole. And I come back over and over again to the fact that whole and holy and healed all come from the same root.
Thank you.
Doctor, I wondered if you could tell us who a mentor was for you in either high school or college.
In high school, I had a couple of really wonderful teachers. I got to take honors chemistry as a junior, and the teacher was a very slight African-American woman who challenged us to give the very best that we were capable of. And I had an advanced placement biology teacher as a senior who did the same kind of thing. In college, I would point to the marine biologist who led the diving classes, the subtidal ecology classes, where there were relatively few women, and asked me at some point to join a team of students who were submitting a grant proposal to the NSF for a research study that we spent a summer working on. I was one woman and there were 7 men. He was a very important mentor for me. People who asked me to do unexpected things or things I might not have put myself forward for, and people who demanded excellence.
Thank you for all the questions, great student questions. And why don't I just wrap up with a lightning round of just a few quick questions. Because you're so interesting. It's so interesting for us to, what a privilege to be here with you. What do you read?
What do I read? I don't get to read as much as I'd like or in as much depth. My pile of unread books just keeps mounting.
Do you like fiction? Do you like...
I like fiction. I rarely get much time to read it. I enjoy biographies. I read history, particularly when I'm preparing for a contextual address. I read in short chunks. history and background about places where I'm going to be and have to speak. I read theology once in a while when I have, time. I've always been fascinated by adventure narratives, like the polar exploration histories.
Do you have a hero?
I have many. You heard me talk
Yeah.
about several, but Ernest Shackleton, the mountain climbers, the ones who first climbed Everest, or by new routes. Hudson Stuck, who together with several Native Americans first climbed Denali.
What's your proudest accomplishment?
I think one that I share with my husband in having reared a daughter who made her own decisions, surprising ones to us, and who is a healthy, whole, and well-related human being.
And your biggest regret?
My biggest regret. Probably about relationships that have thus far not been repairable.
And what do you think Bishop Hobart would say?
At some
About
level,
your appointment.
At some level, I'm sure he's spinning in his grave. Saying, what? But at another level, I think he would rejoice in the fact that the church has moved into so many other parts of the world and into so many other ways of relating to the world.
Beautifully said. Well, I thank you for those answers. I thank all of you for coming and the great questions we had. And, we have a little reception afterwards, but we're so fortunate to have our own chaplain, Leslie Adams, who's unique in her ability to bring us together at the end of these ceremonies and events and celebrations. And I invite Leslie to offer some reflections.
Well, anybody who's watching me knows that I was not taking notes, so it's not going to be one of those closings. But I thought it would be nice just to give thanks before we part and enjoy our reception. The Blackwell Award celebrates amazing women. So we give thanks for Hobart's only woman graduate, Elizabeth Blackwell, a woman who set out not to make a name for herself, but to make a way for women to enter the professional practice of medicine. We remember and give thanks also for Elizabeth's sister-in-law, Antoinette Brown Blackwell, the first woman ordained to the Protestant ministry in the United States. And we give thanks for another in the first in her field sisterhood, our 2011 Blackwell recipient, Sally Presant, a woman who did not set out to make a name for herself, but who made a way for women to enter the rabbinate. And of course, we give thanks today for our Blackwell recipient, the first woman primate of the Anglican Communion, the Most Reverend Catherine Jefferts Shorey, who set out not to make a name for herself, but to open the way other women might lead their religious communities to the highest level. So as we conclude this celebration, let us rejoice in the holiness of all creation, which continues to reveal its marvels to us in the trailblazing leadership of women willing to be first. Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Thank you all for joining us. Please join us for the reception.